Performing Arts in the Harlem Renaissance by Kyle, Michelle, Logan, and Kayla. In performing arts, you will believe that the actors and dancers show how they feel on stage and that they are sharing the story with the audience in the stage. But in the Harlem Renaissance, there were African American performers who were treated horribly by the white people that were either on stage or in the audience. There were performances that white people did and that offended the African American performers by blackfacing, calling them names, and throwing food and or drinks at them while they were performing. There were African American performers that wanted to fight the white people and tried to get independence, but they couldn't because the white people wanted to get rid of the African American performers and tried to ruin their lives on stage. The performing arts broke negative stereotypes based around intelligence and body by allowing African Americans to embrace their unique culture. There were a lot of negative stereotypes that happened while the African Americans were performing on stage. What's more, performers like Josephine Baker were entertaining white audiences with blackface comedy, portraying black people as too intelligent to speak proper English or remember their dance moves. This made a lot of African performers mad because they saw that the white performers were blackfacing them and that Josephine Baker was taking a part of making fun of like their own people on stage. Even popular flyers of places like the Con Club sexualized black women's bodies but refused to let them in as Patreons. This made a lot of African American dancers angry because the white people were making the African American women sexualize their bodies and were making them as a Patreon in the white clubs, which means that they couldn't get any money from their performances. The white people that were watching the African performers had a lot of negative stereotypes against the African Americans since they made the African American dancers dance almost in the nude, and they were making fun of them while they were on stage. This made a lot of African Americans gain more negative stereotypes while performing on stage. When the African Americans were performing, the white people were trying to make up a stereotype because they wanted the African American performers to have a bad reputation with the white audience and they wanted to hurt their career in performing arts. After their performance, a lot of white people were throwing food or drinks at the performers and they were calling the performers names since the white people wanted the African performers to hurt their performance since it was their passion. This made the performers look bad because they often retaliated against the white people and they were often viewed as angry and aggressive towards the white people. There were a lot of stereotypes in performing arts that happened in the Harlem Renaissance, but there were performers who broke negative stereotypes and changed their views on African performers.
In order to break stereotypes based around intelligence and body image, African Americans express themselves through the performing arts, specifically dance, music, and theater. The first interest was sparked in 1921, when the Broadway musical Shuffle Along became an all-time hit. Soon following that, the London musical Running Wild made its debut in 1923. By both becoming highly successful, these musicals created an interest in black dance and theater, helping develop opportunities for individual black performers, according to the Victoria Albert Museum. Black theater and dance would soon become a key role in the Harlem Renaissance. When it started growing exponentially within the African American community, the performing arts reflected the ideals of Black Revolution and seek to establish symbolism apart from white culture, as said by the editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Rather than showing how alike they were to white culture, African Americans embraced their differences. Women often embraced their curvy body shape, participating in erotic dances and showing off their bodies to please the public. Many also turned to comedy, taking unintelligent and raspy voice stereotypes and showing them from a comedic standpoint. Some even controversially took blackface and went to comedy clubs to perform vulgar stand-up. These brave performers enabled others in the African American community to feel confident and appreciate their culture. They showed that their culture was indeed different, but it was not any less valued from others. Everything that was negatively thrown at them, they were able to turn around and be proud of it. The performing arts allowed African Americans to take their biggest insecurities and turn them around not only for them but for everybody else.
I'm Michelle, and for my part of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about how Wrigley Torrance affected the Harlem Renaissance for African Americans. This is Wrigley Torrance, and he was a famous Renaissance poet and playwright. He wrote some of the first serious, accurate dramas of the Black life. Although he was a white male, he would try his very best to make his plays or poems to showcase the greatness and beauty of African Americans. One of his performances of the one-act prose play Granny Man Me had an instrumental in opening up American theater to Black actors. And although this play was originally casted by white people, he decided to cast Black actors to show their differences. And in 1917, he had a performance with a Black cast, providing one of the first opportunities for serious Black actors. When he casted African Americans for his plays, it made them believe in themselves more and pushed them to continue acting and following their dreams. He also organized the National Survey of Negro Theater, which a lot of white people would come to and watch his plays just because they were so interested on why a white person would waste their time to make a play and cast it with African Americans. But in reality, those were one of the most notable and fascinating plays that was made during that time. His plays was a success, and afterwards more and more white people, or any in general, were more accepting in Black people coming into the performing arts. A lot of them danced really good and landed them with positions in other plays with other playwrights that were white. Or some would dance out in the streets for money and made them more financially stable and finally stable enough to live comfortably. Wrigley would use his privilege of being white to showcase the true beauty of African Americans during this time.
Torrance wasn't the only one who forced people to realize the talent and potential that Black performers could possess. Another pioneer in performing arts during the Harlem Renaissance was Josephine Baker, whose polarizing and captivating performances allowed many more Black entertainers to find success in years to come. She started her career as a minstrel performer in the show Shuffle Along, often appearing in blackface. Unfortunately, Black performers weren't typically allowed to appear as themselves on stage while performing. The use of blackface was seen as a loophole, a way these people could still express themselves, at least to some extent, in front of the all-white audiences they performed for. During these performances, Baker portrayed Black people as idiots who were unable to remember their dance moves or even speak proper English. She was heavily criticized for these blackface performances, even her own mother believing that she was reinforcing the negative stereotypes that African Americans already had to face constantly. This wasn't the only thing she was criticized for, as many people were upset over her role in the over-sexualization of the Black female body. In her most famous performance, La Rêve Negre, Baker danced almost completely nude. She grew famous through these performances, as many of the white men who attended her shows became obsessed with her. Baker believed that this was a way that she could reclaim power, with the focus being on her, while other members of the Black community were afraid that she was only playing into the negative stereotype that Black people are primitive in nature. Josephine Baker was easily one of the most polarizing figures of the Harlem Renaissance. The same performances that garnered her respect and admiration on a wider scale led her to be shunned by members of her own community. People lost respect for her, believing she was only strengthening a number of negative stereotypes. But these were the very same stereotypes that Baker managed to take advantage of. These broad, unfair criticisms that were meant to hold her down ended up leading her to wealth and fame. The oppressors who looked down on Baker and her peers were the same ones looking up at her as she performed.